exile. Second Olympia in October mellows the soul with a subdued gaudiness. Usually the winter clouds have not yet set in. The pink and white cherry blossoms of spring are long gone, but orange and red and green spangle the oaks and the maple trees. The fallen leaves on the grassy verges that line the residential streets and the malls paint the city's floor in bright color, and over all lies the crystalline light of the northern lands. The neatly trimmed parks and lawns of the Northwest American Republic's capital city become fragrant with the smell of late-blooming heather firs imported from Scotland. The air is clear without a single scent of pollution, and the streets hum softly from the electric engines of the city's trolleys and occasional ground cars. The branches of the native evergreens can be heard whispering in the wind. There is not an electricity or telephone pole in sight. In the Northwest, the last of those unsightly gibbets that once disfigured every town in America for a century and a half are long gone. They were rendered obsolete by the broadcast rotational power grid that allows Northwesters to pluck their heat and light and sound out of the very air. There was no longer a live cable anywhere in the Republic, above ground or below it, nor did the quiet whir of electric motors. H. Covington intrude into the landscape. It was almost like the summer buzzing of bees in the background. Visitors to Olympia always come away remembering how quiet everything is. At 10 o'clock on an early October morning, somewhat more than 40 years after the beginning of the Northwest War of Independence, Don Redmond of the Bureau of State Security took a call in his office. "Colonel Redmond?" said a brisk young male voice. "Last time I checked," said Don. "Unless the Americans have cloned me now and I'm the clone. I beg your, is this Colonel Redmond?" asked the voice, slightly flustered. "This is Don Redmond, Captain Barringer. What can I do you for? The state president would like to see you, sir." "Immediately." "On my way," said Redmond. He put his pocket-com away, but before he got up, Don rang his immediate superior, Major General Stephen Capshaw, and told him of the summons. "Yes, I know. His Excellency's office advised me already that they wanted a word with you," replied Capshaw in his crisp Oxonian tones. The correct form of address was actually Mr. President, but like many veterans, Stephen Capshaw was still a part of the old world he grew up in, as well as the new one his generation has created. The commanding officer of Boss still affected the mannerisms of the old British upper class, all the way down to eschewing a uniform for rustic Lancashire tweeds and keeping a pipe rack of Dunhill briars in his office. It was not the first time that Don had carried out special troubleshooting assignments directly for President Morgan, which presented a break in the chain of command and a sticky problem in protocol, complicated by the fact that Redmond was also the state president's son-in-law. It might have proven to be an uncomfortable work relationship. Redmond was the guy in the office who had married the boss's daughter. But his combat record with the SS during Operation Strikeout and his long history of skillful political police work let him stand on his own 2 feet. At Redmond's insistence, the state president and his aides were always scrupulous in observing the proper procedure and keeping his CO informed as to where he was and what he was doing, with a resulting absence of interdepartmental friction. Redmond walked down the corridor of the Bureau's offices in the Temple of Justice and stepped outside into the cool fall air. He did not have far to go. To his left rolled the wide green expanse of the Capitol Mall. The sward was dotted with statues of Adolf Hitler, George Lincoln Rockwell, Richard Butler, and Bob Matthews, all of whom now shared the fate of countless past heroes and statesmen in becoming a perch and outhouse for flocks of pigeons. There was the War Circle ringing the Tivoli Fountain, containing memorials like the gutted shell of a burned-out American tank from Operation Strikeout, the number plate from the fin of a North Korean-made missile, and a strange-looking Art Deco pillar made from captured American helmets. Looking to his right, Don saw the state president's official residence sitting on a small hillock less than 300 yards away. There was a sudden flare of light in the crisp blue sky. Redmond shaded his eyes and looked far to the south. There he saw the soaring match-like flame of a shuttle rocket taking off from the Centralia spaceport 30 miles away, outbound for one of the NAR's 4 space stations. Redmond silently breathed a prayer to the All-Father for the safe passage of the shuttle, for he knew that it carried badly needed supplies and equipment that would eventually reach his eldest son, who stood on the surface of another world inconceivably far away. Then he added a quick postscript to Yahweh as well. Redmond was a National Socialist, but he felt it never hurt to cover all the bases. Don Redmond was a medium-sized man of middle age, smooth-shaven with dark brown hair that was going lightly salt and pepper. He wore a nondescript, dark pinstriped suit with cuffed trousers, wide lapels and a broad tie and overcoat in the current favored quasi-1932 cut. A broad fedora hat sat on his head at a rakish angle. Fashion in the Northwest Republic was odd. In some respects, it was a matter of government policy, which demanded as total a differentiation as could be achieved between Northwesterners and the crawling chaos of the United States. There were strong historical and psychological reasons to believe that clothes did indeed make the man and the woman, and that popular dress carried a significant role in shaping and channeling thought processes. The Ministry of Culture accordingly took a strong interest in sartorial affairs. Having succeeded in turning the clock back to the 1930s, the chic designers of Seattle were now trying for the 1890s. They were reintroducing Leg H. Covington, of mutton sleeves and long lace-up boots for women, as well as bowler hats, sweeping mustaches, sideburns, and high-winged collars with cravats instead of ties for men. This might seem an incongruous national dress for the only country on Earth with effective interplanetary travel, but there it was. The current rage for mustache and Piccadilly weepers were a little much for Redmond, who had been clean-shaven all his life, so he stuck with his zoot suit and managed to do so without looking like a cop. He walked across the lawn and stopped outside, mingling with the small group of European tourists to watch the changing of the guard ceremony in front of the House of Parliament. Today it was the Special Service Scots Guards Regiment, bagpipes wailing. The SS troops were resplendent in their black dress jackets with silver piping and crimson swastika armbands, a spectacle of swirling kilts in the Royal Stuart tartan, and feathered blue Glengarry bonnets, cairngorm brooches pinning their shoulder plaids. The single Special Service Guard in dressed black at the gatehouse had a comm on, and the newsreader was talking about a school of dolphins that had been seen jumping in the south end of the Puget Sound. It appeared as if the Northwest Defense Force's naval and air patrols had succeeded in putting a stop to Korean and Japanese poaching in the North Pacific, and the friendly sea creatures seemed definitely to be on the way back from threatened extinction. "Morning, Colonel," said the officer. A large Doberman Pinscher dog sat his haunches outside the guardhouse, panting and staring at Redmond. "Good morning, Hank," said Don. "You are the box." "The box, sir," said the soldier. "You might fool me. The box you can't—" "I don't think I could fool you, Hank," chuckled Redmond. "Sir, since you're in boss, you know about the surgically altered double for Big Bill Vitale that the ONR tried to slip into the Republic 2 months ago," said the guard. "Actually, I was the one who caught him," replied Redmond reminiscently. "Yes, sir. The box, please." "You got it," said Redmond. He put his left thumb onto the security disk. There was a faint tickle as the subatomic light beams analyzed his DNA and matched it with the security clearance. Database. The little light on the box blinked green. "Authenticate," ordered a firm and authoritative male mechanical voice. "Redmond, Donald, 726,878, boss," said Redmond. "Good morning, Colonel," returned the robot politely. "Catch any bad guys lately?" "A few," replied Redmond. "We don't have many bad guys in the Republic nowadays. We like it that way." "We don't have many bad guys because of gentlemen like yourself, Colonel," replied the machine. "Authenticated." "Have a good day, sir." "You too, Box," replied Redmond. Like so many citizens of the Republic, he had found himself falling into the habit of talking to robots, even though he knew they were not actually intelligent and had been programmed with random conversational responses, based on the identity and voice-inflected mood of the person they interacted with. "Guess you won't have to unleash Rover," chuckled Redmond. "It would be embarrassing if he were to tear the arm off Miss Sarah's main man," agreed the SS guard with a smile. The Doberman was a Gelf, a genetically engineered attack dog, controlled by a microchip inserted beneath his fur at the base of his neck that tapped into the animal's spinal column and communicated directly with his brain. The microchip had been programmed so that the dog would react in a given way to any one of 84 external situations, anything from Don pulling a gun on the guard, to someone trying to scale the fence, to an unauthorized person attempting to feed him. The correct commands from a handler with an authorized voice pattern could also transmit the necessary neural signals as commands that went right to Rover's brain cortex, such as kill. The dog's steroid-enhanced muscles were strong enough to smash through a locked door. He could survive for many minutes with a bullet in his heart or his brain, and his surgically implanted polymer teeth were capable of ripping a man in body armor into several pieces. Rover could also sniff out any known explosive compound at a distance of 300 yards. A handful of these animals were a far more effective and deterrent protection against an assassination attempt against the Republic's leader than any number of armed guards or electronic devices that might be susceptible to interdiction or sabotage. The mechanical arm blocking the walkway lifted and Redmond entered. H. Covington, the grounds. 2 gray squirrels were chasing one another on the trim green lawn beneath the towering Douglas firs, wrestling over an acorn. The dog ignored them. The state president's official residence, formerly known as Longview House after the treaty that had brought the Republic into being, was actually the former Washington state governor's mansion. The house stood in the shadow of the old domed state capitol building that now housed the Republic's parliament. Longview House was the oldest structure still standing on the Capitol Mall. Originally built in 1908, the 2-story Georgian Revival mansion of mellow red brick was erected in a hurry and never intended to last, but it was now over a century and a half old. After the signing of the Longview Accords, the retreating Federals had attempted to burn the building, but had been prevented from doing so and the fire doused by one of the janitors while the janitor's 14-year-old grandson had held half a dozen FBI agents and U.S. Marshals at bay at gunpoint. A small but graceful marble monument, topped by statues of both grandfather and grandson, now graced the high-ceilinged vestibule. At the present, the presidential home was furnished with many of the fine collection of American, British, and French antiques from the late 18th and early 19th centuries which had graced the dining rooms, offices, and bedrooms of successive Washington chief executives since 1909 when the first governor moved in. The NDF had found these items hidden in a warehouse charged with explosives, wired and ready to blow. A young volunteer had earned himself an Iron Cross by disarming them. The volunteer was now in his late 50s. He had no statue, but he did have a bar in Post Falls, Idaho, where his framed Iron Cross hung on the wall, and anyone who wore the War of Independence ribbon was assured of a free drink and a meal. Don stepped into the warm carpeted vestibule. The SS guards in full-dress black uniform who stood on either side of the hallway with slung Schmeisser Mark 12 submachine guns eyed him but said nothing. Another Gelf dog lay on the carpet, a German shepherd who regarded Redmond with a lazy eye as possibly lunch, possibly not. The sergeant at the reception desk was a new man he had never seen before. He checked Redmond's ID and thumbprint again and told him, "The state president is waiting for you in the library, sir. For the record, may I examine your sidearm, please?" Redmond handed over his automatic pistol, a charged energy clip, and an extra magazine of slender, deadly copper-jacketed bullets without cartridges. The man punched the serial number into his desktop computer and ran it. "Yep, that's you. New security procedure?" asked Redmond. "The ONR might duplicate your features, Colonel," replied the SS sergeant with a smile. "They might even arm their assassin with one of these new Gary Wilkerson Mark IV kind handguns. But they might forget to duplicate the serial number." A little extra random check General Hammond thought up. "Good for him," said Redmond approvingly. "These GWSs go to piece as they say?" asked the sergeant curiously as he handed the pistol back. "Yup. I flip up the holographic sight on this infant. I can drive a nail at 400 yards. Boss likes to stay ahead of the curve. But I thought you guys in the Special Service Protective Branch would have been issued with GWS by now?" queried Redmond. "We got a familiarization day on the range with the GW Mark III, but General Hammond, he's a real traditionalist. Still loves that smell of cordite. Hey Sarge, don't knock it. Villainous saltpeter won this country for us twice, once against the Indians and once against Zog. Bet you could have used a few of these Wilkersons back in the old days, eh, Colonel?" asked the SS man. The sergeant had spotted the green, white, and blue War of Independence ribbon on Redmond's wide pinstripe lapel. "Wouldn't know, Sarge. They never actually let me go strapped," which was a valid precaution. "I probably would have shot myself playing with a piece. I was just a gopher, really. Never fired a shot in anger, so to speak, until the Missoula incursion." I was a senior in Sandpoint and not commissioned yet when Clinton III decided she wanted to play grab-ass with the Northmen. They threw us cadets and everybody else into the salient. All they could give us were some Valmet AK knockoffs we'd smuggled in from Finland, and 3 loaded magazines apiece. That and one of Dr. Cord's first plasma projectors mounted on the back of an old Toyota pickup truck. But it was enough to bring down 4 of the American bombers and a couple of cruise missiles. Without their air cover, the Americans. H.A. Covington never could fight their way out of a wet paper bag. We threw the bastards all the way back to Minnesota. Sir, if you don't mind. My saying so, you look a bit young. Redmond laughed good-naturedly. I was young. You're new on this detail, so you haven't seen me around, but you'll get used to me going in and out. Sometimes business, sometimes family. I married the boss's daughter. I usually get a steak and a few beers for this story, you know. I was 12 years old and I had a route as a paperboy in Bellevue. I didn't know it, but one of the homes where I delivered the Seattle Times on my bike was a safe house used by the NVA and senior members of the party who were on the run. I started carrying messages and doing errands for the people there. Hell, I couldn't even tell you when I figured out who they were and what was going on. But I never let on. Then one day I was in the house, and there was a new visitor. I recognized this big hillbilly-talking fellow with a beard from the television news. I walked up to him and I said, I know who you are. You're Corbett Morgan. I looked at the rest of the grown-ups and said, I may be just a kid, but I'm as white as you are. I want to be a Jerry Reb too. Now you've either got to kill me or swear me in. They swore me in. I became the second youngest member in the history of the Northwest Volunteer Army, the youngest being Commandant Morgan's daughter Sarah, aged 11. To tell you the truth, she was what interested me most about that house. You were with Corbett Morgan back in the old days? Exclaimed the SS man, highly impressed. Port Townsend flying column? No, not the flying columns. They were for the hard men, which I wasn't. I was mostly just an errand boy for No. 2 Seattle Brigade under Jock Graham. Even that was only for about the last year or so of the war. After I joined, I learned that my uncle and his wife were Jerry Rebs as well. They found out what I was doing, and they hit the roof. Matt and Heather brought me home as a child after my parents were murdered by Mexicans in North Carolina. I was 6 years old then. Turned out they were party people from way before 1022, but for me to be involved, hey, that was something different. Uncle Matt and John Corbett damn near got into it up. Close and personal when Matt found out he'd sworn me in. They'd always bent over backwards for us kids not to be involved. Holy shit, gasped the SS man. I mean, sorry, sir, I apologize for my language, but the name just hit me. Your uncle was Matt Redmond? Yeah. My father was Steve Redmond, his younger brother, and before you ask, he was lawyer, I'm sorry to say. Our family skeleton... The sergeant turned white. Oh, Jesus, sir, I didn't mean no. I can hardly take offense, Sarge, since I volunteered the information. I've learned down through the years that's the best way to deal with it. No need for whispers, just get it out in the open. I've come to accept it. In the old days, there were hundreds of thousands of lawyers, and all those swine had to be related to somebody. The truth cannot offend, it simply is. Hey, Colonel, thanks for the story. I guess I owe you a steak and a beer or two, said the sergeant with relief. Maybe I'll take you up on it someday, said Redmond with a chuckle. Anyway, mustn't keep the main man what counts waiting. No, sir, by no means. Go right in. The president is waiting for you in the library. Don knew the mansion well since he and his family spent their holidays there, but the library was always Don Redmond's favorite room in the entire house. Any library was, for that matter. One of the things that made Don such a good investigator was a naturally inherited, insatiable curiosity and desire to gain knowledge, especially knowledge of the frailty and wickedness of human nature. The books on the mahogany shelves were assembled from private collections around the world. The works of Houston Stewart Chamberlain, Count Gobineau, Dietrich Eckert, Alfred Rosenberg, Savitri Devi, Francis Parker Yockey, Nesta Webster, William Gailey Simpson, and George Lincoln Rockwell. Centuries of accumulated racial wisdom seemed to pervade the room. Many of these books had spent long years in secret hiding places to preserve them from confiscation and destruction by the Zionist authorities in a dozen countries. More than one NVA volunteer had gotten their revolutionary start with the simple but dangerous assignment of concealing and transporting forbidden books. H.A. Covington, and literature, one step ahead of teams of U.S. Marshals, who had hunted them with federal court orders for the book's destruction in the hungry incinerators of Zog. The pictures on the walls were watercolors and engravings of Palouse Falls, and the Dalles area of the Columbia River Gorge, part of the original furnishings of the large and high-ceilinged room. They as well had been preserved from the federal flames by the valiant janitor and his boy. Yet there was one more sentinel Don had to pass before he reached his destination. As he opened the door to the library, Don was confronted by a small, spry little man with a grizzled rat's whisker mustache, gray in every sense of the word, gnarled and grim and glaring at him. The old man's hand was on the pistol at his hip. "Good morning, Starshine. The Earth says hello." Redmond greeted him cheerfully. Corey Nash grunted at him, looked him up and down, and then grudgingly stood aside to let Redmond in with a jerk of his head. The president's longtime sidekick was an even more reliable security feature than the dogs. So far as Don could recollect, not only had not a single living person ever seen the old man smile, but nor had anyone ever seen him asleep any time in the past 4 decades. "You still owe me $22.50 for a month's paper delivery," said Don. "It was only $18 and you know it." "Why do you keep bringing that crap up? You're still trying to cheat the man out of $4.50 after all this time? Don't you think that's pretty low?" hissed the old man. "It is my life's ambition. I dream at night about how I will someday get that money from our illustrious head of state, even though nobody takes American dollars here anymore. Aside from that, how are you today, Mr. Nash?" "As always, wee cherub, you are an ebullient breath of good cheer on this fine autumn morning." "Don't be a cheeky bugger, you young lout," growled the codger. Don was well within shouting distance of 50, and his head had hairs as gray as those on the mottled skull of Corey Nash, whom he had known since he was 12. Nash had not approved of Sarah's boyfriend then, and did not approve of Don now, but that was not unusual. Corey Nash was a total misanthrope who approved of no one, including the members of the Morgan family, whom he had served with every fiber of his being for decades. Nor did Don hold it against him. Nash had been born in Rhodesia, and his parents had been stupid enough to stay after it became Zimbabwe. One day young Nash had come in from the tobacco fields outside Gwelo and found his entire family murdered and partially eaten by the cannibal leopard men, as well as a number of their body parts removed to make Muti Bantu magic. This had understandably skewed Mr. Nash's view of the human condition. "Me? Whose cheeks do I supposedly bugger?" asked Don. "He told the United Nations Commissioner for Human Rights the same thing the other day," called a deep voice from within the room. "I'm scared he's going to kill that Gelf dog out in the vestibule and make a winter hat out of him." "Damn it, Corey, get your senile ass out of the door and let Don in. I know you've never forgiven him for dragging Miss Sarah over the threshold into unholy wedlock, but I need to talk to him. Senile, my dangling Rhodesian Chilogo. You're older than I am, damned peckerwood fool." Back snapped Nash. The coot shuffled out of the way with a snarl in his body, admitting Don with obvious reluctance, and slammed the door after him. "Just out of curiosity, when was the last time Corey uttered a civil word to anybody except Sarah and my kids?" asked Redmond. "Well, to be fair to the man, he did apologize to Hillary Clinton for making such a mess of her dress when he cut off her other ear," replied the man in the library. "How many years ago was that?" "Never mind." John Corbett Morgan, state president of the Northwest American Republic, rose from behind his desk and shook hands warmly with his son-in-law. He was a tall and heavy man in his early 70s, attired in a dark suit of Italian cut that seemed to hang on his still powerful body like armor. It was incongruous. Anything Morgan wore somehow seemed to look like denim working clothes. His face was seamed and scarred above a patriarchal white beard, and a white mane done up in a single ponytail hung down his back. His grip was strong, and his blue eyes were cold and clear and sharp as steel. "Morning, Don," he boomed. "How's Sarah and all them young'uns of ours?" Corby Morgan was an early settler who had made the Northwest migration when he was 19 during the Butler era. Yet even after more than half a century, his voice and his diction still retained the accent of his native Kentucky mountains, where his H.A. Covington family had mined coal and made moonshine for generations. He had been a hard kid growing up in the bleak coal country, a hard man in his youth, a hard man in his middle age, and he had aged hard like an ancient oak. It was almost as if Morgan was defying history itself by continuing to speak with the voice of his ancestors who had gotten their English from the time of Shakespeare, via Jamestown. In his words, one heard the voice of a people now extinct. Several years before the official language of the court system in Harlan County, Kentucky, always the last holdout in the United States on just about everything, had finally been changed to Spanglish, along with the termination of the last English language instruction in what passed for the public schools. In Morgan, the real Harlan County lived on. "They're all fine, sir," Redmond assured him. In official business settings, Redmond always addressed his father-in-law with formal correctness. The family got a long comm last night from Allen at Landfall Station, although 12-minute time lag made conversation a bit stilted. Fortunately, the Mars orbit is really close to Earth right now. He's looking great. He says that Martian gravity feels fantastic when he's working or resting inside the station. He can take off all his gear in his pressure suit and he only weighs about 50 pounds. But he misses seeing trees everywhere, and he's looking forward to coming home next year. He took a comcam with him while he went outside the dome and diddled with some electronic gear he had to adjust, so we got to see some of the Martian landscape, such as it is. It's kind of like Wyoming. "Now you know I don't like Wyoming jokes," chuckled Morgan. "Then why are you laughing? No, it really does look like Wyoming. All empty and red with a blue sky above, just asking for us to come along and make it livable. We'll make Mars green with our own Douglas firs one day, Don. The science boys tell me it can be done once we get an oxygen atmosphere and maybe diddle with the tree's genetics a bit. The Martian rock can be powdered into soil, and enough water and oxygen can be extracted to give the planet a breathable atmosphere. We can even manufacture water and carbon dioxide through the new cold fusion process. It will be cold as hell at first, until we can warm it up with superheated air from a nuclear reactor and thicken it enough to create an atmospheric heat trap, but we can live there, like we live in Alaska in the winter. Sheol, man, we're a cold weather race, remember? Iceman heritage and all that lefty liberal crap. There's actually a good deal of truth in that, commented Redmond. Having to survive through the long winters of the northern lands and the natural selection that resulted was what initially gave us our genetic edge over the other species of humanity. An edge we intend to keep, said Morgan. Mars is where we will finally show history just what white people can do on our own. We will give that dead world life, plants and animals from this one. We will breed our people up bigger and better and stronger than ever we were here, because we're starting fresh. Nobody on our back riding free and leeching off us. No blacks, no Jews, no mud people. And by the eternal, not one of them will ever set foot on Mars. The stars are ours, Don, and they will remain ours forever. And if the Ministry of Culture have their way, one day we'll be walking over Mars in tricorn hats, periwigs, and shoes with silver buckles, jibed Redmond, and lace handkerchiefs and slim little canes with silver heads, and perhaps small and exquisitely wrought snuff boxes, not to mention the elderly folk with their big mustaches and top hats. And the cravats. Why the hell not? Chuckled the president. The Lord commanded his people to go forth and multiply. He said nothing about how we were supposed to dress. I'm proud as hell of that astronaut grandson of mine, and I know you are too. Keep this confidential, but he'll have some company up there soon. We're sending out 200 more personnel to landfall, both scientific and military. They left Orbital Station 3 on the Andromeda almost 2 months ago, and they're on course. They'll reach Deimos in 3 more months, transfer themselves and their cargo to the landing craft, and once they're down, they'll settle in for a long stay on the surface. Their mission is to begin the terraforming of the planet, to build the atomic smelting plants that will break down the ferrous oxide and the underground ice and start building up an atmosphere. We're shooting for breathable air on Mars within 10 years, and the beginning of serious colonization in 20. If we can hold the bastards off down here for another generation, then the survival of our race will be assured, because we will exist on 2. H. Covington. Worlds, and not just this one. The goddamned kikes will never be able to kill us all off. Best thing is, Allen will be able to catch one of those landing craft back to Deimos and from there to Earth. He'll be home in time for Christmas after next. Let's you and me make a date to go up to the mountains with a couple of shotguns about December 22nd next year and bag him a wild turkey for Christmas dinner. We can do that now that Game and Wildlife has stocked them throughout the Republic. Agreed Don. Along with the wild boar, the eagles and condors, And the genetically recovered passenger pigeons and Tasmanian thylacines. Look, John Corbett. I know it's a classified matter having nothing to do with the Bureau of State Security, but what's all this scuttlebutt I keep hearing about mammoths? In about 5 or 6 years, yup, answered Morgan with pride. Gotta have something for our growing wolf and mountain lion population to eat, not to mention our new population of Siberian tigers. Isn't it odd that Zog accuses us of extermination? Said Redmond with a wry smile. We've brought how many species back from the brink of extinction now? In some cases like the thylacine, quite literally back from the grave cloning their DNA?
Yeah, well, I just wish we'd had some of them turkeys up in the Olympic Mountains back in the old days of the Port Townsend column. In them days, half the rabbits and squirrels and deer we shot weren't fit to eat because of all the toxic waste that Zog dumped into the air and the water.
That's great news about the expanding Mars colony, sir, although hell's bells, we still haven't settled our own homeland fully yet. I still find it hard to believe that a small and relatively poor country of 40 million people like us can afford a space program. When those 40 million are all productive, creative, and hard-working people, who each and every one contributes something to society rather than leeches off the state or lives off usury, then it's amazing what a country can afford, said Morgan. When that country doesn't have to pay for massive drug addiction, third-world diseases, rampant crime, billions in foreign aid to puppet governments around the world, and maintaining armies of occupation over sullen third-world conquered nations, then there's money for little extras, like a space program. When that country doesn't have gargantuan multinational corporations gorging themselves on the national treasury, then it's astounding what a chunk of change becomes available for other things. 40 million people all working in sync in a land of peace and freedom from materialism can perform miracles they never dreamed of in the last century when big business ruled, son. When you don't have to maintain millions of people in prisons and forced labor camps, when you have stability and unity in a racially homogeneous society, when you've got real free enterprise as opposed to monopoly finance capitalism, when the government is only as big as it needs to be to maintain the state, and above all, when you have no goddamned lawyers to suck everything dry, you'd be damned amazed what a small country like ours can accomplish. You want to know the greatest testament to the success of the revolution? Let me ask you something. How many boss agents are there all told, and where are they? About 100, I think, said Redmond. All of them are based across the street there, except when they're out on assignment. Exactly, crowed Morgan. That's what, one single government agency and one political policeman for every 400,000 people in the Republic? Counting all their various agencies, FBI and ONR and Department of Homeland Security, internal CIA, and the state and local security organs. The ratio of political police to population in the United States is 1 in 217, working out of over 3,000 heavily fortified facilities, offices, prisons, and bases. The boss allocation is % of our national budget. The Civil Guard is 2% of the budget for normal criminal policing, and we have no prisons beyond county jails and holding facilities at guard and military barracks. No slave labor camps here like in the States. Someone shows his butt in the Republic, we either kill him, flog him, erase him, or fine him, and then we turn him loose. The total budget for all police and prison agencies in the United States is 18% of their gross national product. What does that tell you about how our way works versus theirs? Oh, before I forget, on a completely different topic, I got something for you. The Irish ambassador smuggled them in by diplomatic pouch, H. Covington. Morgan pulled out a wooden box and flipped it open, and there by heaven they lay. "Hot damn rolled Havanas," gasped Don. Now far be it from me to badmouth our own hydroponic tobacco industry, especially in view of all that lovely excise tax money it earns for the Republic. Saves us from needing an income tax. But the fact is that rank does have its occasional privileges. Take a handful before you go. Both men lit cigars and sat down on the sofa. The door opened and Corey Nash shuffled in bearing a tray with a large metal percolator pot of hot coffee and 2 large mugs. "Now, Corey, did I ask for coffee?" asked Morgan. "No, but you got it anyway," the old man snarled. "Real coffee, Mr. Nash?" asked Don with a smile. "Acorn and chicory was good enough for everybody in this country for 20 years, and it's bloody good enough for you now," snapped Nash. He set the tray down on the table in front of the sofa and shambled out, muttering to himself. Don poured them both a cup of the traditional Northwest hot tipple, black and foul-smelling, and the very nectar of the gods to those who had lived through the swinging economic sanctions of the early days. Acorn coffee had become a proud national symbol for the Northwesters, and to this day it still outsold the real bean in the private shops and state co-op stores. "You wanted to see me about something, sir?" He finally got around to asking. "Yes. I've got a hot one for you, Don," said President Morgan. "A hot one and a weird one. Something's come up, something really odd. A blast from the past, you might say. But before we get into that, I'd like to hear anything you can add about that Andrews case you just wrapped up." "That worries me, Don. I've read the official reports, of course, and I understand that the affair is sub judice now. But you were the lead investigator, and you can fill in some gaps for me. Were these fruitcakes really planning on assassinating a leading Christian identity member of Parliament, or was it all just beer talk?" "It had reached the serious planning stage, all right," said Redmond. "I think they would have tried it, maybe succeeded, and then there'd be holy hell to pay, if you'll pardon the expression. We were tipped off when a girl from the labor service who was waitressing at the restaurant in the Oba Club in Seattle overheard some things she didn't like, and she contacted Boss. Significantly, our witness is a Wiccan practitioner herself, but she has sense enough to know that murdering Bible boys is a non-starter in a country where 80% of the population are Christians of one sort or another. Not all old believers are as wigged out as the suspects in this case are. You must have been elsewhere when we signed the Republic's Concordat with the Vatican," said Morgan sourly. "I had 'em dancing around Parliament in their bearskins and horned helmets waving their damned hammers like loons. Them and the Paisley Presbyterians screaming about the whore of Babylon. Along with the shoutin' Baptists, the Pentecostals, and those nuts who think the Pope is a space alien from Alpha Centauri." Redmond shook his head in bemusement. "We slapped full electronic surveillance on their dumbasses, and we have video and audio from their meetings in Andrews's garage, on the monorail, in the beach house up in Anacortes. It will convince a jury of 12 male citizens upright and true that they were serious about killing Pastor Briggs, plus female citizens as well, if Mrs. Parker demands women on her jury, which of course she has the legal right to do. Andrews and the 3 other men will most likely be flogged and have their citizenship suspended for a number of years, which may sound rough for nothing but talk, but you know how vital it is that we keep a tight grip on the religious situation in this country. I believe the events can be presented in such a way that the Parkers will be shown as the instigators, and that their case needs to be referred to a security court. Since Briggs wasn't actually killed, they'll escape the gallows, in which case I hope the judge will order them both to be erased." "How compromised is the Old Believers Association?" asked Morgan keenly. "The OBA is fine. They have repudiated the conspirators, loud and clear and unambiguously. This wasn't an OBA thing, it was just these 6 people who went batty," Redmond assured him. "Todd Andrews and the other 3, and the married couple, the Parkers. I have some questions in my mind about the true nature of the Parkers' involvement." "O&R agent provocateurs?" asked Morgan H. Covington. "There is no concrete evidence that the U.S. Office of Northwest Recovery was involved, but we know it's one of their long-term, strategic goals to set off a full-scale religious war in the Republic. Hell, they have enough help from the idiots on both sides here who, for no reason related to sanity, seem to want the same thing. The O&R also has a habit of inserting male-female teams, married or otherwise, since that maintains long-term loyalty by reducing the natural urge of both sexes to go looking for nookie elsewhere and maybe getting personally involved with the enemy. Our War Prevention Department does the same thing with the agents we send into the States and Aztlan. Boss confiscated the Parkers' homecoms and portacoms, and the technical analysts in our lab found several traces of what appear to be encrypted elements of computer code, which the Parkers deleted before they were arrested." "From outside the Republic?" asked the President keenly. "Can't tell. Whatever these fragments were, they were top-of-the-line encrypted, and we haven't been able to decode them yet. We're working on it. As to the Parkers themselves, they're completely clean as far as we can determine. We hacked a number of databases both in Aztlan and the United States, and what we came up with appeared to match their stated backgrounds as far as birth dates, social security numbers, employment, etc. If they were set up with false identities, then it was done by pros. But I've always admitted the O&R does good work. The Parkers took the Gap 6 years ago, the usual dramatic running of the border, so forth and so on. Perhaps a bit too dramatic. Did they enter from the U.S. or Aztlan? Aztlan, replied Redmond. They said on their homecoming applications that they were from Santa Clara, California. If they were coming from California, why didn't they use the open border crossing at Mountain Gate? Asked Morgan. Parker claimed that because of his technical skills, he would not have been able to get an exit visa, which for all I know may be the truth. Despite all the limpieza de sangre crap, the Mexican government is realistic enough to know they need skilled white labor to keep even the semblance of society functioning down there. The Parkers also had about $40,000 in savings they wanted to bring with them, which the Mexicans would never have allowed them to take out of Nuevo Mundo Hispanica. Plus the fact that even so much as asking to enter the Republic for a visit can bring heavy retaliation down there, as you know. It all looked straight up incredible. We get thousands of cases like that every year, as the last white people in the Southwest and Texas try to make a break for it. Glenn Parker was employed as an electronic circuit mapper in one of the space communication facilities. Parker is a Class B2 citizen due to his technical qualifications. The wife was a CCAT, no kids, which kind of adds to my suspicion a bit. A man with a B job and a wife with the Charlie Homemaker's check that would have gotten significantly better with each child. No financial reason for them to have no family. If they couldn't have children for medical reasons, why didn't they adopt? The Lebensborn Heritage Recovery Teams are snatching hundreds of white babies every year now from the States and Canada, running them across the border, like the old rum runners and drug cartels used to smuggle in hooch and dope. The creches are full, and our own people are so into having kids that Lebensborn actually has trouble finding adoptive parents now. Not like it was 60 years ago under the American regime, when a healthy white infant could fetch $100,000 on the adoption market and the government was in the business of kidnapping Aryan children for sale to PC yuppies and faggots. We have an embarrassment of riches, you might say. Yeah, I know, agreed Morgan. That's why Parliament passed the law granting a 1-grade citizenship bump and increasing the homemaker's benefits for anyone adopting a Lebensborn kid now. By the way, Sarah and I are already a 1S, so we don't need a promotion, but we've already applied, Redmond told him. We should have some more little feet pattering around in a couple of months. Sarah's incredible. 5 of our own, 2 of them not yet grown, and already she's ready for the second wave. Says she can't wait around for grandchildren. Eva's so crazy to have some babies to play with, she's actually set aside some time from her acting lessons for child-rearing classes at the high school. And John is making a crib out in our garage with my tools. And speaking of grandchildren, what's the story on Cindy L? Asked Morgan H. at Covington. The Mark Conway situation is looking good for when he gets out of the Army, replied Don. I think we'll get a formal proposal soon. When Alan gets home, Sarah and I are going to propose for Sinead O'Neill, General Michael O'Neill's oldest daughter. At Alan's request, of course. I don't believe in marriage shopping my kids off without consulting them first. Alan and Sinead met when she was in junior high school and he got roped in to do some lectures on astronaut training. He's 12 years older than she is, which our social engineering people tell us is about the right compatibility range. And that strikes me as about right as well. I know there's only a year between Sarah and me, but those were different times. They've already worked it out between them. Sinead is waiting for him. General O'Neill knows, and he has given us to understand he won't entertain any other proposals, presuming Alan gets home within a reasonable time. The girl should be in the first year toward her biochemistry degree and on her way to B1 citizenship by then, and she has already applied for party membership. Between the two of them, given Alan's Class A citizenship and her education, they will both be eligible for early life grants, so that's their house taken care of. I've met Sinead at some military dues, when she was there with her dad. I was impressed. I heard she and Alan were courting and I'm glad it worked out.
Right, as much as I hate to do so, back to the Andrews case,
said Morgan with a sigh. To all outward appearances, the Parkers are just a couple of kooky pagans with a bug up their ass about Christianity, all the usual blather about Jesus being a dead Jew on a stick, and they seem to have an ability to talk weaker-minded people into doing things they shouldn't. Agent Provox usually have that ability, remarked Morgan dryly. God knows we learned that the hard way about 1,000 times back in the old days. Any chance at all any space programs might have been compromised by Glenn Parker. I've got a grand boy sitting up there on that red hunk of rock we call Mars, and I will be exceedingly wroth if this bastard has done anything that might keep him from coming home. You and me both, sir. Believe me, I looked into that possibility very closely. I don't think so. Parker's security clearance wasn't that high, and the technology he worked with is nothing new to the Americans or the Chinese. We're looking into that as well, of course. Even though we don't have any actual proof of espionage, sabotage, or unlawful contact with the common enemy, I've already put in my recommendation for a security court, at least for the Parkers. No publicity, jury drawn from alpha citizens only. Afraid I have to overrule you there, Don, said Morgan with a frown. Sorry, I wish there didn't have to be a trial. We sure as hell could do without this kind of public washing of the Republic's dirty laundry. But this is one we have to bring out in the open. It's not just because secret tribunals are a Zog thing. We use them too because sometimes we have to. We're still at war, despite over a generation of trying to reach some kind of permanent agreement with these people. But if the Christians think we're covering something like this up, they'll nail my hide to a barn door next election. Nor can we exclude Bravos and Charlies from the jury, as would be the case with the security court. Most Christian identity citizens are of those degrees, and it ain't politically expedient to keep it to alphas only. Alphas are mostly National Socialists, and thus considered to be pagans by Christian fundamentalists. I'm already getting pelted during question time by the CI faction in Parliament, not to mention the opposition, who are gearing up for a real field day with it. Plus the Pentecostal crew is likely to use this as an excuse to renew their demand that their new immigrants to the Republic come in as bravos, without doing military service, thus doubling their voting strength at a single stroke. How could they possibly use this case to make a totally unrelated political demand? Asked Don. They'll find a way, believe me, chuckled Morgan. Which I can't grant them, because then the Oba probably would try to stage a coup. They are painfully conscious that Christians are a majority in this country, and if I automatically hand a militant Christian sect the 2 votes apiece that come with B citizenship, they'd have a legitimate grievance. The Republic is walking a religious tightrope of the kind that no white society has experienced since 17th century Europe. Dawn and balance has to be maintained. You earn your citizenship, and you earn your votes through service to the state and service to society, not as a bribe for political peace. We ever start. H. Covington. Handing out citizenship and votes as patronage, it will be the beginning of a potentially fatal corruption in our system. Hit war just that happened in the United States, and I can't let it happen here. This Andrews case has to be handled by the numbers, with everything on the table. There mustn't be the slightest hint of a cover-up. Otherwise the CIS and the Pentecostals will be all over my ass like ugly on an ape, in Parliament and out, all in the name of Yahweh and the great jumping Jesus, of course. The problem with having a parliament based on the old Rhodesian model is that 40% of it is allocated for the opposition, Don reminded him dryly. Now if we had a unitary National Socialist state— Damn, don't you start, snapped Morgan in exasperation. I get enough of that from the NS benches. At least the Nazis don't have this damned religion bug up their ass. Sometimes I think they're the most balanced and rational of the lot. I have often wondered how the Führer would have viewed a situation where National Socialism is considered to be a force for moderation, chuckled Don in delight. I think he's looking down on us from Valhalla and laughing his Austrian ass off. What the hell was ever wrong with good old-fashioned hoot and holler religion? Grumbled the state president. You work your butt off all week. You get drunk and raise a little hell on Saturday night. Then the wife drags you to church on Sunday morning with a hangover and you sing and jump for Jesus. Then you go have a big lunch and go fishing in the afternoon. That's how life is supposed to be, goddammit. What the hell was wrong with that? Who needs all this rapture shit anyway? Ain't a damned thing in the Bible about it. If in that good old-time religion was good enough for Stonewall Jackson, it ought to be good enough for us. Redmond smiled inwardly. He knew that John Corbett Morgan was one of the most acute, ruthless, and eclectic statesmen of his age or any other, with a mind like a steel trap, a man who is entirely capable of holding his own in any scientific, economic, or political discussion with any other world leader. And yet his occasional lapses into Kentucky hillbilly were not affectations. They were the true soul of the man himself. For the Northwest Republic, or any other nation on earth, to be led by a bona fide man of the people was an event rare in history. To be well led by such a man was a gift of God. Or the gods. I ever tell you how we ended up with a mighty fortress as our god as our national anthem? He had, but it was one of the stories from the time of struggle that Don never tired of hearing. Morgan plunged into it without asking further. After weeks of incredibly tense negotiations at Longview, when we damned near had to go for our guns and shoot our way out a dozen times, we finally browbeat and arm-twisted those bastards into giving us our own country. Then at the last goddamned minute, when we were all set to walk out and tell the world that the white race would live, that it had all been worth something, guess what? The damned tub thumping. Certain of our brave and loyal comrades of the biblical persuasion threatened to break the whole deal, walk out, start all the fighting and bombing and burning again, over the earth-shaking issue of what the hell song we would play when we ran up the first official tricolor. They wanted onward Christian soldiers, then the Nazis demanded the Horst Wessel Lied, and the Odinists wanted Wagner. Thank God for that angel in human form, Kathy Frost. While we all argued and made fools of ourselves in front of the President of the United States, the commissioners from the UN, the International Red Cross delegation, and all the enemy generals who wanted to keep on fighting and killing us, she managed to convince us to play a mighty fortress as our god. It was Christian enough for the tub thumpers, and German enough for the Nazis, and she just plain shamed the Odinists into shutting the hell up when she pulled up her blouse and showed what was done to her. The Holy Rollers liked it since it was written by Martin Luther, so they could score one off the whore of Babylon in Rome. The fate of our race hanging in the balance, and there they all were, blathering about whores of Babylon. Kathy said it had some kind of personal meaning for her. Well, now it has meaning for everyone. Thank God one of our people had the Mormon Tabernacle Choir version on CD for the speaker system, and we went ahead and did it before everybody changed their mind. Or we probably would have ended up with another 5 years of war. You want a trial on Andrews? You got a trial, conceded Redmond with a shrug. You're the boss of boss, sir. Hell, maybe once the Parkers get their brains lasered squeaky clean and go through. H. Covington. Reconstruction, they'll become devout holy rollers and spend their Sundays handling snakes and jumping for Jesus. Now what's this other assignment you have for me? It's a ghost story, said the president with a straight face. I beg your pardon, sir? Asked Redmond politely. I thought you usually told us those at Halloween over the roasting hot dogs and marshmallows. Actually, those are just old manly Wade Wellman stories I ad-lib, Morgan confessed. But this is a real one. A ghost from our past has come back to haunt us. Does this ghost have a name? Asked Redmond. She does, replied Morgan. Trudy Greiner. What? Roared Don, stunned, leaping to his feet in amazement, his cigar ash falling onto the carpet unnoticed. I said Trudy Greiner. Morgan opened his desk drawer and handed Redmond a piece of paper encased in clear glassine plastic that he took from a folder. This is a letter that my office received yesterday, supposedly from the Los Angeles Metroplex, although there's no way to tell where it actually originated. There's no mail service between the Republic and Aztlan, pointed out Redmond, holding the encased letter up to the light. From what I gather, there's precious little mail service in Aztlan. God, this is crap paper. The eco-freaks down there must have recycled it 6 or 8 times. It's about to fall apart. Well, at least she's still speaking English and not Spanglish. Proper Mexican Spanish, now that I can speak and read and write from my language training at Sandpoint, but I still haven't quite mastered that shit half language the Americans speak now, for all the stuff I have to read in it that comes across my desk. It's even worse than Puerto Rican. I know there's no mail service from Aztlan, responded Morgan. This letter was carried by one of the private courier companies who specialize in smuggling mail into and out of the NAR. The Mexicans generally overlook it. They treat it as a kind of necessary evil, and they have sense enough to know they can't completely suppress all contact. As to the paper, she was probably lucky even to get that if she's really living in L.A., with all the constant shortage of the basics down there. Redmond read the paper out loud. To the Honorable John Corbett Morgan, State President, Northwest American Republic, Longview House, Olympia, Washington. Mr. President, you may be surprised to hear from me after all this time the Republic has spent trying to hunt me down and kill me. I am writing to tell you that you can stop looking. I'm tired of living among strangers. I'm tired of running and hiding all my life for a crime I did not commit. I am going to put an end to it. It is my intention to exercise the right that belongs to every other Aryan man and woman the world over. I am coming home. I have gotten an exit visa from the Aztlan government, never mind how. On October 22nd of this year, the anniversary of the Coeur uprising, I will walk into the Republic at the old Interstate 5 border crossing at Mountain Gate, California. If you want to shoot me down on sight or hang me from the first tree on the white side of the border, then go ahead. I don't care anymore. You'll be murdering an innocent woman, but I would rather die in the country I gave my youth and my heart to bring into being than live in this mud-colored horror down here for one more day. If you don't kill me outright, then I demand a public trial or court-martial on the charges against me. I did not betray the Olympic flying column. I would have given up my own life for Tom Murdoch, for Melanie Young, and for any one of my beloved comrades without a moment's hesitation. Even though 40 years of hell have passed, I still mourn them all every day. I can no longer live with this lie, this terrible accusation. It is wrong. I don't deserve this. I can't stand it anymore. I swear to you by my immortal H. A. Covington, soul that I am innocent. As a soldier of the Northwest Volunteer Army, I demand the right to live and to die by the laws of my beloved country and to clear my name, should God in His infinite mercy grant me that deliverance. If not, then let His will be done. Yours truly, Volunteer Gertrude Greiner. P.S. I am attaching something below that I have always been willing to give for the homeland, even during all the years you were hunting for me. Below the P.S. was a brown thumbprint in blood. Holy Christ, muttered Don, stunned. And here I thought you were a National Socialist? Asked Morgan with a grim smile. I am. That means I can swear by Christ and the Aesir both with a clear conscience, said Redmond. Trudy Greiner, the last of the revolutionary traitors, is coming out of hiding after more than 30 years. She must have lost her mind. That would seem to be about the only way we might manage to catch her, replied Morgan dryly. No other target has been so successful in escaping our hunters. We hadn't even caught a lingering scent of her for years. It was as if she dropped off the face of the planet. Boss and WPB had about come to the conclusion she was dead and buried secretly somewhere under a false name. How do you know it's not hoax? Asked Redmond. I assume the bloody thumbprint was for identification purposes, but both DNA and fingerprints can be faked. The Office of Northwest Recovery and our own war prevention people do it all the time. Or it might be the woman who wrote it is one of their damned genetically engineered doubles, like that clone of Bill Vitale they tried to slip past us. I know. Granted, it's possible that this is some kind of stroke from the ONR. But the Bureau's forensics lab gave the document the Hill of the Ravens. Good going over, and the fact is that both thumbprint and DNA actually do match, replied Morgan. Are they sure? Asked Don. Positive. The Greiner woman was fingerprinted and DNA typed by the FBI in Oregon after she was arrested for felony hate crime over 40 years ago, when she was a teeny bopper. As you may recall, when Zog officially pulled out of Portland, some of the local red, white, and blue yahoos decided Longview didn't mean them. We had to go in heavy and fight our way into the city street by street for 3 days before we cleaned them out. You remember the Battle of the Bridges? A historic moment, recalled Don with a smile, the first artillery barrage fired from Nazi cannons, and the first rumble of Nazi tanks since 1945. You got it. Damn, boy, that was a sweet sound to my ears. Remember it all like it was yesterday. Anyhow, an SS action group, ironically enough led by a certain young lieutenant named Bill Vitale, captured the Portland FBI headquarters before they could destroy their files and hard drives. So we have Trudy Greiner's DNA on record. My gut feeling is that the letter is legit. I can well imagine that she might eventually get so tired of looking over her shoulder for the hunters that she just wants it to be over. I've heard of her, of course, mused Don. Hell, so has every man, woman, and school child in the Republic. My kids grew up singing nasty nursery rhymes about Trudy Greiner, some of which made me wash out their mouths with soap when I overheard them. They used Trudy's face on targets at junior high school riflery ranges. The ultimate Stukach, the traitor bitch who sent Tom Murdoch and Melanie Young and 50 others of the proudest and bravest partisan unit in the NVA to their deaths in the ambush at Ravenhill Ranch, for cold hard cash. Our own Wicked Witch of the Northwest. What was her particular hate crime back in the old days in Portland, just out of curiosity? Asked Redmond. Hate crime most foul, Morgan told him. It was determined by the Zionist authorities that one Gertrude Greiner, aged 17, was responsible for inserting a politically incorrect joke into her high school annual. Something poking fun at female sexual perverts. Two double entendres punning the words Beaverton and liquor trade. H. Covington. Inflicting mental anguish, insensitivity to alternative lifestyles, creating a negative and unsupportive environment. All that happy horse shit. You're too young to remember, Don, but in those days a white person couldn't sneeze without offending some little pissant minority and going to jail. You have no idea what it was like to have to weigh and measure every word, to be constantly looking over your shoulder and whisper, never knowing when some monkoid or some pale-skinned wretch would turn you in to the thought police for the slightest casual remark. The men and women of our race lived in a perpetual state of fear and anxiety, and anyone with a white skin who dared to stand up against the regime was punished with maniacal intensity, especially if they used wit or humor. Zog's politically protected minorities could never stand being mocked, you know. Mockery undermined them more than anything else. They knew it, and they reacted to the slightest hint of disrespect with the ferocity of a wounded beast. Trudy's little joke about lesbians made the whole high school annual prohibited hate literature under the Dees Act, so it had to be recalled and the offending humor removed. Trudy was convicted by a human rights tribunal and served 18 months. Her family was fined and forced to pay for the cost of reprinting the annual, minus political incorrectness. Trudy joined an NVA cell while she was in women's prison. Trudy? Put in Redmond curiously. You knew her personally, sir? I did, said Morgan. Please let me proceed, Colonel. Redmond sensed a raw nerve. Certainly, sir. But if you might refresh my memory, Mr. President. When did she get hooked up with Tom Murdoch in the Olympic flying column? I spent this morning reviewing her file, just to make sure my memory hasn't gone soft on me after all these years, said Morgan. Trudy Greiner was still in the slammer on 10/22, but she got out a few months later, legally restricted to Portland on parole. The uprising had been suppressed, but the guerrilla war in the countryside and the cities was heating up by then. In view of the political nature of her offense, Trudy had to do some really fast talking to get sprung. She told the parole board all about how she'd learned to renounce hate and turned her life around, how she'd undergone this wonderful spiritual awakening since she'd been inside, claimed she'd had a passionate lesbian relationship with a wonderful Hispanic inmate. No, don't make that face, damn it, Don. We had to do those things in those days, or at least say them. I took the diversity oath on 4 separate occasions myself, just so I could get a job running a forklift or stacking pallets in a warehouse alongside Filipinos and Somalis, because it was the only way I could feed my family, including that little lady you're married to. Remind me to tell you one day about the time during the guerrilla days when I caught up with this one particularly nasty-ass Puerto Rican foreman.
You have, sir, Redmond reminded him. On more than one occasion,
including our last Christmas dinner. Kind of put me off cranberry sauce for a while. So I did, agreed Morgan with a big rumbling laugh from deep inside his massive chest. Well, it is one of my favorite stories. But you need to understand, hit war necessary to survive and fight on. And we all did things we weren't too proud of later. I didn't believe it about Trudy then, and I don't believe it now. She said what she had to say to get out of that hellhole so she could join in the struggle. They may or may not have believed it, but they saw that she was burning the pinch of incense and making all the right noises, and so they let her go. I am aware of the historical context in which the revolution took place, sir. I wasn't criticizing, said Redmond neutrally. We all had to burn the occasional pinch of incense on the altars of Zion's false gods in order to survive, sighed Morgan. But it still rankles. A lot of us old-timers still ain't completely easy in our consciences about some of the choices we had to make in those days. Cindy L. and Eva don't even know what a lesbian is, do they? Asked Morgan in wonder. Ain't that a kicker? We grew up with all that filth being thrown in our faces every day, day after day and month after month and year after year until it became part of our whole lives and thought, and nowadays I bet my granddaughters don't even know. No, sir, said Redmond in genuine gratitude. So far as I'm aware, they don't know what a lesbian is. That was what we were fighting for, remember? So that little girls can grow up to womanhood without ever hearing the word lesbian, among many other things. You and the men of your generation saw to it that my children grew up not, H. Covington. Just safe, but clean. Like I said, Mr. President, I am aware of the historical context. We saw to it, Don. You should remember some of it too. You were there. You earned that green, white, and blue ribbon on your lapel, young'un. I should know. I pinned it on you. I remember some, but it was long ago. As for this medal, well, when I was 12, I wouldn't have known a political idea if it walked up and kicked me in the ass. I knew I didn't like the punk Mexican and Chinese kids who robbed my paper route money, and I remembered enough from back in Carolina to avoid anyone with a black skin, but that was about the sum of it. I was there largely for Sarah, sir, concluded Redmond frankly. I know, son, and I've always loved you for it. But hit war always better to do the right thing for the wrong reason, or well, maybe a different right reason in your case, than to do the wrong thing for any reason. Anyway, as I was saying before you got me off on an old man's blather, because of her D's-Act conviction, Trudy Greiner had to register with the FBI as a subversive and wear a tracking bracelet on her ankle, which she promptly cut off. She was too well known in Portland, so she went on the run. She made it to Seattle and made contact with the NVA. There she was assigned to a quartermaster team in Bremerton. That put her on the west side of the Sound and gave her familiarity with what would become the Olympic Flying Column's operational area. She helped set up safe houses and apartments. She made false ID. She maintained arms caches. She handled money through various covert party bank accounts. And she helped to run an underground printing press and distribute party propaganda leaflets, which would have gotten her life without parole. She was brave. She was a good soldier. She kept her cool and thought fast on her feet, and her teammates admired and respected her. Every assignment she was given went seamlessly and was never compromised. As far as anyone could see at the time, the FBI and the fat pose never got a line on her. Trudy had the ideal undercover operative's ability to become invisible in a crowd. Maybe that period of her life was where she acquired the skills she later used to evade our hunter squads. If she was always a rat for the feds, then she must have been really deep cover. My guess is that if she went bad, it must have happened later on. If she went bad? Asked Don, intrigued. I'm getting there, son, admonished Morgan. After a year, in view of her proven expertise, she was assigned to the Olympic Flying Column support crew. That meant she lived in town, but she helped to obtain and transport weapons, ammunition, medical and other supplies and so on to the column. It was complex and dangerous work. She had to do a lot of driving around the woods and the mountains of the Olympic Peninsula in the dark, hauling a car or pickup truck full of contraband, going miles along rural highways and fire roads with no lights to avoid aerial surveillance. She had to talk her way past roadblocks using fake ID and travel permits with $30,000, 10 boxes of ammo and 20 pounds of C4 hidden in her car, hoping to God our science nerds had packed them right to hide them from the sniffer dogs and fatty sensor devices. A lot of our people in her job died at those checkpoints, but she was damned good at it. She carried out dozens of successful rendezvous without a hitch and transmitted vital supplies, weaponry, and money to Tom Murdoch and his crew. Murdoch trusted her absolutely. I know that because he told me so. You were in regular contact with the column, sir? Asked Redmond. Yes. Broadly speaking, Tom's outfit worked the southern part of the Olympic down to Tacoma, and U.S. Port Townsend boys had our stomping grounds in the north, although there was a lot of overlap. Corey Nash was our liaison, carrying occasional messages we could no way risk on the phone, and we were even able to pull off some joint operations, like the attack on the aircraft carrier John F. Kennedy that led to the Americans pulling the U.S. Navy out of the Puget Sound and shutting down the Bremerton Naval Base. Plus, Murdoch and I met several times at various safe houses and other secure locations when it was necessary to take care of business and exchange intelligence. It also meant that Trudy Greiner was one of the few people who could communicate with the column at need, and who would have some knowledge of where at least a few of them would be at any given time, Redmond pointed out. She was also one of the few volunteers who operated on her own and was out of sight of the H. at Covington. Others for extended periods of time during which she might have made contact with the enemy. That point didn't escape us back then, son. It were one of the reasons she was suspected after Ravenhill Ranch. Now, if memory serves, on that day the Olympic Flying Column were on their way to attack the Kitsap County Courthouse in Port Orchard? Asked Redmond, searching his memory. Yes, Morgan confirmed. The one that used to be on Division Street. The special criminal court was sitting there that day. You know, the one Zog tried to set up when the secret military tribunals became too much of a political embarrassment. The idea being to try and slap a purdy civilian legal fig leaf on what was by then pretty much a military dictatorship in the United States. It was some kind of executive session or whatever that day, so none of our own prisoners were scheduled to be in the building. That made it a good time to hit the place and see if we could barbecue a few of the big pigs in the black robes, not to mention as many lawyers as we could send to hell. 4 surviving members of the column actually did take out the courthouse out that morning, recalled Redmond. Yes, volunteers Frank Palmieri, Dragutin Saltovic, Edward M.C. Canless, and Brittany M.C. Canless. The last members of the column accomplished their mission even in the face of the disaster that overtook their unit at Ravenhill, which is added to the legend of that day, and deservedly so. The original plan was to use a mortar truck, iron pipes stacked on a flatbed trailer, each tube loaded with a charge and a homemade shell. An old provisional IRA tactic we'd been wanting to try for a long time. A special hydraulic lift elevated the pipes into firing position. The driver set his timer, got out and ran like hell, and the mortars detonated. They destroyed the truck when they went off, but they also launched their shells into the air, that is if the damned things worked right. They weren't very accurate, and you had to make really sure you positioned the vehicle correctly and got your elevation down pat. If your unit's science nerd had miscalculated the ballistics or the strength of the barrel charges, you'd get mortar bombs dropping all over everywhere in the neighborhood, except the target. If everything went according to plan, some federal position hiding behind razor wire, sandbags, and concrete walls suddenly had about a ton of high explosive dropping down from the sky on top of them. The trick was to position the truck just right and work out the elevation just right to make sure you didn't miss and blow up Joe's barber shop and the diner down the block. I remember the truck mortars, sir, said Redmond. Yeah, despite what happened at Ravenhill, we didn't give up, and we eventually got pretty good at making those little poppers. Got so we could rig up vans with false roofs that came off when the mortar barrels were unlimbered, white phosphorus shells, all kinds of tweaks and interesting features. If Murdoch had succeeded in his mission, it would have been the first truck mortar attack. As things were, the 4 surviving volunteers didn't have time to mess with raising the barrels from the planned firing position, where they would have been without covering fire from the rest of the column. They had to improvise, so they simply rammed the truck into the courthouse lobby and blew it. I remember we were able to get a van into Fort Lewis one night and level the officers' mess from half a mile away, recalled Morgan, with a reminiscent chuckle. If memory serves, the truck was driven into Port Orchard separately from the bulk of the column, pointed out Redmond. That's how the 4 survivors were able to complete the mission. Why was that, Mr. President? Commandant Murdoch ordered it done that way. Why? Asked Don. No idea. So far as we have been able to determine, he didn't explain to anyone at the time why he did so. We know he handpicked the 4 volunteers who drove the truck, 2 in the cab and 2 in a scout car. Palmieri, Saltovic, and the Missy Canlesses are all still alive, as well as 4 more men who weren't with the main body of the column when it was ambushed. They may be able to answer that, said Morgan. I remember from an old Northwest Broadcasting Authority documentary show, I think it was called Incident at Ravenhill, that the feds originally claimed the Fatpo ambush that destroyed the column was a triumph for their spy satellite system, said Redmond. Infrared heat and motion detectors, an evil racist white mouse couldn't move on the ground without their knowing about it, so forth and so on. H.A. Covington. They tried to claim that, yeah, but it was crap, growled the old warrior. I'm old enough to remember before the rebellion. Some of the nervous Nelly naysayers in our own ranks claimed that white guerrilla warfare in North America was impossible because of orbital surveillance and other things in Zog's little bag of pyrotechnic tricks. Well, the nervous Nellies were wrong. There was, in fact, a clear and applicable historical precedent. Our weaklings just didn't want to face up to it. From 1969 onward, the Provisional IRA fought a sustained guerrilla campaign in Northern Ireland, largely in an urban setting, against the wealth, manpower, and technology of Great Britain. Yeah, I know they were Marxist scum, but the fact remained that the Provos showed it could be done, if we just had the guts and the dedication. Ordinary men were not powerless in the face of the New World Order. The bigger and more complex Zog was, the more vulnerable they were to a few brave men with weapons in their hands, and the courage to use them. My God, in 2001 the United States was almost brought to a standstill by 4 crashing aircraft hijacked with box cutters, commented Don. How could anyone claim it was impossible to bring down the beast? 19 young Arabs damn near did it on their own. When white men in the Northwest finally screwed our courage to the sticking point, we largely followed the Provost's example. Hell, we even stole their rebel songs, added Morgan with a smile. You'll recall that I commanded my own column out in the boonies of the Olympic for almost 3 years, and I can tell you that the Feds' much-vaunted super-duper spy satellites and their drone aircraft were never all that accurate. Kind of like the Zeppelins during World War I, a technological advance that was supposed to be decisive, but it fizzled in practice. It was all in the interpretation, and the people they had analyzing all that satellite data were more often than not affirmative action bozos and bitches who didn't have a clue what the hell they were looking at. I've often said, we didn't win the war against Zog, their own diversity lost it for them. So many of their people were incompetents who were where they were and doing the jobs they were doing because of the color of their skin, or because they had tits on them. Hell, as long ago as the Afghanistan and Iraq invasions, Bush II's idiots used to order in massive bombing raids on wedding parties and school buses because they had no idea who was who. Why do you think the Afghans finally rebelled en masse against the American occupation and the American puppet government in Kabul? Zog couldn't even find their real enemies on barren mountainsides or in wide-open deserts, never mind mountains covered with trees. The fact was that during the war, as far as our open country active service units were concerned, the Feds never learned to distinguish between our people and ordinary travelers, hunters, logging crews, park rangers, firefighters, local residents, sheep and cattle, wild animals, their own military convoys, whatever. The eye in the sky was a danger, to be sure, like 100 others we faced, but we eventually learned to evade it the same way the Iraqis and the Serbs and every other smaller power Zog attacked learned to evade it. Simple camouflage. Hide in plain sight, blend in with crowds, dummy vehicles and Quaker guns, you name it. It was just one more problem we had to deal with, and we dealt with it. Faking out the satellites eventually became second nature, and we got on with the business of killing Zog. Actually, it was a lot more dangerous for a volunteer to be assigned to an active service unit in one of the cities, where you might be ratted out by some pale-skinned traitor who wanted the OHS reward money. Other than that one incident at Ravenhill Ranch, they never succeeded in completely destroying any other flying column. The Olympic flying column was betrayed by an informer, Don. With all due respect, sir, how do we know that? Asked Redmond. Well, for one thing, we have the testimony of a FATPO defector who came over to us right after Ravenhill, said Morgan. Arthur M.C. Bride, his name is, brought 2 more FATPOs in from the cold with him. They're both dead, but M.C. Bride is still alive. Rose to command sergeant major in the Army after the war, then went into the labor service. He's retired now, a widower, married a female volunteer, Brooke Arnold. Little chubby blonde girl with the heart of a lion, who as far as I am concerned was up to Melanie Young standards. But that's just my personal opinion. Brooke never had any songs written about her, Melanie did. Guess that's the way it plays out in history sometimes. M.C. Bride lives up in Bremerton. He was there when that nigger major took the call from the rat, or from someone, H. Covington, who was in contact with the rat. Took the call on his personal cell phone, not an official or a military phone or computer. That's important. The Ravenhill ambush was not something that came down from the FBI or the Office of Homeland Security. It was something set up between that monkoid Coleman and a Stukac he was working himself. M.C. Bride was questioned very seriously at the time, you better believe it. I grilled him myself, but he swore he didn't know who the informant was. It rang true at the time, and I still think M.C. Bride was telling the truth, that he honestly didn't know who the traitor was. But I ain't anywhere near perfect, and for all I know, maybe I missed something. M.C. Bride might be a good starting point for your investigation, Don. Noted, sir. But this M.C. Bride guy aside, what about all those FBI and FATPO records we captured during the final assault on the city, sir? What did they say about Ravenhill Ranch? Damned little, growled Morgan, which is odd. That in itself tells me something. Hit wore one of their greatest victories against us, yet there was almost nothing in their own records about it. They kept that incident well under wraps, even from their own people. There was something heavy moving in the shade there. Don spoke bluntly. Mr. President, let me be absolutely clear on precisely what my orders are from you in this matter. In view of the possible return of Trudy Greiner, you want me to investigate and ascertain the true facts regarding what happened to the Olympic flying column almost 40 years ago, an incident that occurred before the majority of the population of this country was even born. And you want me to do this in a matter of just a few days, before Gertrude Greiner rocks up at the I-5 crossing and embarrasses the hell out of the Republic with her demand for a public trial? A public trial at which, after an entire generation of hate propaganda and accusation, we might not after all be able to produce any real evidence that might satisfy the world that she's guilty? That would be accurate, Colonel, yes, returned President Morgan. Why? Demanded Redmond bluntly. Don't get me wrong, John. You know I'm fascinated with that part of our history, and I'd love nothing better than an excuse to jawjack with old NVA vets about the past and get paid for it. But this cuts a wee bit too close to the bone for me to enjoy it as part of my hobby. Is there any particular reason you are asking me to undo 3 decades of anti-Trudy Greiner propaganda at this point in our national life? Why not just grab her when she walks across the border, take her off somewhere, shoot her in the head, and grind her up into fertilizer, like we did with all the scum during the cleanup? Like we still do on occasion when circumstances seem to demand it. Moral dimension, son, sighed Morgan. That accursed moral dimension that the old man taught us to exalt above all things, damn his decrepit hyper-ethical ass. Shit, why couldn't he have been a cynical opportunist like all the rest of his movement generation? You know the old man's rap. What makes us different from them and all that happy horse shit? There are certain inconvenient facts. I beg your pardon, sir? Asked Redmond. Certain inconvenient facts? What facts might those be? Like the fact that I don't think she did it, replied Morgan softly, looking out the window down at the slim blue line of the South Sound gleaming through the firs. Because God damn her, Trudy Greiner may in fact be innocent. If she had any real respect at all for what we have achieved, she'd stay the hell away and stay the hell guilty. But it doesn't look like we're going to have that luxury, son. Redmond was silent for a few moments. She may be innocent, he said, his voice filled with quiet horror. She may be innocent? And you have done nothing about that in all the time you have been our head of state? That would be correct, replied Morgan. Mr. President, coming from you, that is a statement so breathtaking that I will not at this stage comment upon it, said Redmond evenly, recovering himself. What I am hearing here is that we might have lied to our own countrymen for almost 40 years. You have just denied and negated a primary nation-building legend from the crucial first generation of this country's existence, but we'll leave that for the time being. So we're practicing a little historical revisionism here today? May I ask why you don't think she did it? She was a good soldier, Don, said Morgan, not looking at him. You said that before, sir, pointed out Redmond. H. Covington. I have always thought that, continued Morgan, ignoring him. She was a good soldier. There was steel in her soul, Don, the right stuff, the real stuff, the true stuff. After a time you got to recognize it, and if I ever was deceived, it wore the only time with her. But I think she was a brave and noble woman who somehow ended up being terribly victimized, and I will go to my grave believing that. Redmond understood he was getting involved in something extremely deep. How well did you know her, Mr. President? He asked. Morgan looked at him. Sarah's mother has been dead for years, sir. I repeat that I know the context of the revolution, and I have no intention of making moralizing judgments. I will also give you my word that anything you tell me will be kept in strictest confidentiality, meaning I won't tell Sarah without your permission. But if you want me to look into this letter and re-examine the Ravenhill Ranch incident, then I need to know everything. I never slept with her, if that's what you're getting at, said the president with a smile. I was still married at the time I met Trudy, although the war had separated me from my wife for a long time. I was very fond of Trudy. I had some dealings with her in the year before she was assigned to the Olympic flying column, and I met her on several occasions afterward. I admired her very much, and if you want to get biblical about it, yeah, I suppose I committed adultery with her in my heart. A beautiful, fiery young woman who was just as dedicated as I was to the cause of securing the existence of our people, and a future for white children. Yeah, I was tempted. Damned tempted. Circumstances never played out to where I got the chance to do anything one way or the other about those thoughts, for which I will always thank God. I doubt Trude would have gone for it anyway. She viewed me as a comrade and nothing more, and I was always taught that a gentleman can take no for an answer. Besides, after a while it became pretty obvious that she only had eyes for Tom Murdoch, and he was a better man than me. Yes, he was, Don, and I was never jealous of him, for that or for any other reason. If he had lived, then Tom Murdoch would be living in this house today and not me, and we'd all be the better off for it. Did Murdoch have eyes for her? Asked Don. My understanding is they were involved for a time, and then Murdoch broke it off to go with Melanie Young, said Morgan. Which gives Trudy Greiner a far more urgent and human motive for betrayal than mere money, hell having no fury like a woman scorned, said Redmond. That aspect of it doesn't seem to have made it into our history books, for obvious political reasons. As far as the official record goes, the Olympic flying column is a tale of pure and fearless heroism and noble sacrifice for our people, and I have to say that's not all that damned far from the truth. The Olympic boys and girls were our finest and bravest partisans, Don. They never shirked danger and went for the soft targets like some, and they never went kill crazy like Ogilvy's crew and others did. They fought their war with a courage and a gallantry that would have done credit to the Confederate Army. Tom Murdoch and Melanie Young are our anointed revolutionary icons of manly courage and honor and female beauty and virtue, while Trudy Greiner is an icon of evil, which is what we needed and what we still need. Icons, mystique, a theology in black and white that will make sure 1,000 years from now there are still people who look like us in the world. The War of Independence is the greatest saga of the folk since our very creation of America itself. It must not be allowed to become a cheap soap opera. Be that as it may, I'd say that the romantic angle, as we'll call it, makes it even more likely that she's guilty, said Redmond. If Trudy had lost it and plugged Murdoch or Melanie in some kind of jealous rage, yeah, I could see that happening, but I just can't see her betraying the whole column and the very cause of independence and white survival itself, cried Morgan in pain. I'm not saying she's not guilty, Don. I'm just saying I don't think she is, and I admit I have no evidence to back up that conviction. The accusation against Trudy tore my guts out, son, but from the available evidence I had to accept that she had betrayed us, betrayed her country, and betrayed her race. Yet all these years I have secretly hoped to get a letter like the one you hold there. That's why I'd like you to take this on yourself, Don. It means a lot, not just to history and the Republic, but to me. If she is coming back, then she's not the beautiful and purposeful young woman I once knew, I know that. H.A. Covington. She'll be old and gray and someone completely different from the girl I always see in my mind. But there will be a connection between that old lady and the young warrior maiden I knew. If she does come back, and if she can't prove her innocence, then I'm the one who will have to sign the paper that sends her to her death. I'll sign that paper if I have to, Don, but I have to know whether or not she's guilty before I do. Don shrugged and drew on his cigar. Okay, let's assume for the moment that I didn't grow to manhood on the Trudy Greiner legend, that I haven't seen any of the TV shows or the movies about the Olympic flying column wherein she is portrayed as the daughter of Satan. Let me do the old detective trick here, since technically I'm supposed to be one. In any crime, the guilty party has to have three things: motive, means, and opportunity. Trudy Greiner qualifies on motive because motive itself breaks down into three kinds: passion, profit, and protection, and all three might well apply to her. There was her rejection by Tom Murdoch. There was the $1 million she was allegedly paid for her act of treachery. And there was the motive of protection. If she was a federal spy and possibly someone had found her out. If that was the case, that might be why the whole column had to die. Murdoch, or whoever suspected her as a traitor, might have told someone else, and so any potential witnesses had to be eliminated. Now what about means and opportunity? Refresh my memory some more, Mr. President. Exactly what was the evidence against Gertrude Greiner? What led NVA intelligence to believe that she betrayed the column? Cutting through 30 years incrustation of hearsay, urban legend, and crap hit war two things only, said Morgan morosely. The first being that Greiner was one of 9 people who had means and opportunity, who could conceivably have tipped off the fat pose about the unit's movements. Only 9 people survived, all of whom were somewhere else. Agreed, said Don. I think we can take it as a working proposition that like most people the informer was not suicidal, and so somehow arranged to be on detached duty rather than ride into the deadly ambush he or she had just set up. As you said earlier, Trudy operated on her own in urban areas, organizing supplies and logistics for the column, and so she had the opportunity to make contact with the federal authorities or somehow directly with Monkey Meat Coleman. A much better opportunity than any of the others, although some like volunteers Cord Palmieri and Saltovic did do supply runs and other missions on their own. Wasn't it standard operating procedure to always send volunteers on any mission in pairs? Recalled Redmond. It wasn't always practical to follow that rule. And also after a while the feds picked up on it and started concentrating random traffic stops, searches, and harassment on pairs of white people they observed in public. Morgan explained. So yes, some of the other 8 are known to have done occasional single tasks or trips into town for the column, and it is entirely likely that all of them did at one time or another. But more significantly, after the massacre at Ravenhill Ranch, the first 8 volunteers stayed at their posts. Some of them have since held eminent and responsible positions in the Republic's government, in the party, and in society. Trudy Greiner went AWOL. She disappeared off the face of the earth. She broke contact with the NVA the morning of the ambush, and that letter you're holding in your hand is the first solid lead we have had on her whereabouts in almost 40 years. If she wasn't guilty, Don, then why did she run? She may tell us when she gets here, suggested Don. That's what I'm afraid of. The second thing was that on the morning of July 31st, the day before Ravenhill, a $1 million deposit was made into a covert party bank account at the Westlake branch of the Bank of America in Seattle. One of Trudy Greiner's covert accounts. It was a wire transfer from a corporation in Hamilton, Bermuda, which corporation appeared and then disappeared forever, having performed that one single financial transaction. This deposit was made day before the column was slaughtered by the Fat Post. Don. Premeditation, said Don, sending a curl of cigar smoke into the air. Someone was setting it up. Someone knew what was coming. Yes, that $1 million did not come from any known party or NVA source. Jesus, I don't think the party ever had $1 million in the bank until some years after independence, never mind during the revolution itself. The day after the ambush, August the H.A. Covington. Second, a young woman matching Trudy Greiner's description, who had ID in that name and knew Trudy Greiner's password and account details, and who passed an electronic fingerprint scan, came into the bank and withdrew that entire amount in the form of a certified cashier's check. The check was made out to Gertrude Greiner. After the war, we were able to obtain an affidavit to that effect from the vice president of the bank who issued the draft, along with the computer printouts for the transaction. Do we know for certain that Trudy Greiner was the woman who withdrew the money? Asked Don Redmond. There were bank security camera videos, but they have long since disappeared. No, Colonel. We do not know for absolute certain that it was Trudy Greiner who took that money and fled. Even in those days, fingerprinting could be forged. The Israeli Mossad made a practice of it. Nor were we ever able to trace the certified check. We have no idea on earth where it was ever cashed or deposited. By the time the Republic's intelligence services were in any position to do any such thing, the paper trail had become far too old and cold. Cold as ice then, yeah. It's goddamned Antarctic now, and the evidence has been eaten by penguins. You still want me to try and find out the truth at this late date? You need a historian, not a cop. That part of our history is still too close for comfort, and there are still things in some of those closed dossiers down in the basement of the Temple of Justice that could come back to bite us, Morgan told him. This incident prominent among them. You have to understand, Don, that if Trudy Greiner is innocent, then the potential for an ungodly scandal is very much present. Besides Trudy herself, there are 8 survivors of the Olympic flying column. 7 men and 1 woman. If one of those 8 is a traitor who has lived among us all this time, then it will shake the very foundations of this nation to the core. Who are those survivors, sir? Asked Don. 2 of them are now senior military officers, and that worries the hell out of me. Admiral David Leach is the Kriegsmarine Chief of Staff. He has been rightly called the father of the Northwest Republic's Navy, today the 4th most powerful in the world after China, the European Union, and Russia. Another of the survivors is a very senior civil servant, Frank Palmieri, who is currently Minister of Transport for the NAR. He might equally well be called the father of our public transportation system, acknowledged even by our bitterest enemies to be the best in the world. Another veteran of the Olympic flying column is one of the Republic's most brilliant scientists, Dr. Joseph Cord, a genius in his own field of applied particle beam technology and quantum physics, and the inventor of the atomic fusion engine who bears a large part of the credit for making our space program possible. Not to mention his invention of the plasma anti-aircraft weapon systems that broke American air power, and which have made the very existence of this country as a free and independent nation possible, as well as the existence of 100 other small sovereign states throughout the world. Cord is a difficult man to like and work with, like many geniuses. Hell, the man is an arrogant ass. I have to meet him on occasion in my official capacity, and every time I do I feel like I've just finished 8 hours of moving furniture. But Joseph Cord put an end to the American Empire when his plasma ray weapons delivered to humanity a way to bring those terrible bombers and missiles down out of the sky, no matter how high up they tried to hide while they dropped their cowardly bombs. Zog had to come down out of the sky and face their victims man to man on the ground, and they've been on the retreat ever since. Yet another survivor of Murdoch's command is the concert pianist and composer Dragutin Saltovic, a virtuoso of international renown and a national hero in his native Serbia. He's so damned good that his is the only classical music except Wagner I could ever listen to. The man saved me from a lifetime of George Jones. The remaining 3 survivors have spent the past 30-odd years since the revolution in private life. Former volunteer Lars Frierson is a high school teacher in the Dalles, Oregon. Former volunteers Edward and Brittany M.C. Canlis are old believers who run a book and sundry shop in Centralia. One thing you need to know about the M.C. Canlises is that for a brief period, before they joined the party in pre-revolutionary times, they were associated with the William Pierce cult. A lot of people were, sir, said Redmond. If the Christian identity people were our brawn in those days, then the ex-Piercies were a hell of a lot of our brain. I know it, admitted Morgan. Some of our greatest heroes and our most brilliant citizens were once associated with the Pierce, H.A. Covington, group. I am not suggesting that this would necessarily be any grounds for suspicion, but you should be aware of the fact. The Piercies always rejected the concept of separatism, and back in those days it wasn't the complete irrelevance that it is now. You left one out, Redmond, reminded him. The second senior military officer. Yes, so I did, admitted Morgan. The final survivor of the Olympic flying column, Special Service Major General William Vitale. Big Bill, said Redmond angrily. So that's why I'm here. That's why you sent for me personally. You want me to find out if Big Bill Vitale, of all the men on earth, is a traitor. A man you have invited into your own home, a man who is a part of our own family as much as if he was born among us. With all due respect, sir, damn you. I don't blame you for being upset, Don, but perhaps you understand now why I want this handled in the family, so to speak. You cannot possibly think any such thing, snapped Don. No, as a matter of fact, I don't. Do you believe that letter is legitimate? Asked Morgan, pointing to the glassed document lying on his desk. I have no way of knowing whether it is legitimate or not, responded Redmond, nor do I. But we can't ignore it. Especially if she really does walk across that border crossing on the 22nd of October. We can't just wait here for Trudy Greiner to drop whatever bomb she intends to drop on Independence Day. We must have some idea of what the hell we are up against, and we have to know beforehand so we can figure out how the hell to deal with this. Yes, sir, I can see that. There is something else. Sir, you also realize that if I dig too deeply into Ravenhill, and it turns out that our official version of those events, shall we say, becomes inoperative, then it may also involve undermining or revising the whole Melanie Young legend, demanded Redmond. The Melanie Young cult is one of the bases of our whole social culture, especially for a whole generation of young women who have grown up wanting to live up to Melanie's legacy while simultaneously cursing Trudy Greiner as the ultimate in female evil. The Madonna and the devil bitch. Suppose the Madonna isn't really the Madonna and the bitch turns out to be an innocent woman whom we have all spent a lifetime unjustly defiling. Are you sure we want to start down that path, sir? We don't know where it might lead. You were right about icons and legends. If one icon turns out to be plaster and not gold, and if one legend turns out to be a lie, others might be just as false. This business may turn out to be a loose thread, and if we pull on it, the whole fabric of our society might unravel. If Trudy Greiner comes back with some missing piece of evidence, or some way to prove that she really didn't betray the column, we got major problems, boss man. Because if she didn't, then who the hell did? I haven't slept since I read that letter, said Morgan quietly. Don, we have to know. As bad as it might be if she can prove she's innocent, what if she can't? If Trudy Greiner can't prove what she says there, then I am going to have to put a rope around her neck. I've killed men and women in the performance of my duty before, Don, and so have you. I'll do it again, most likely so will you. But never, so far as I know, has it been undeserved. I must be sure. I owe that to the Republic, to history. I owe it to her, and to those 52 brothers and sisters who died on that hillside. And yes, I owe it